Now, from Wish TV, our Wish Story, celebrating a 70-year legacy.
On July 1st, 1954, the switch was thrown. Wish TV went live and a legacy began. Welcome to our 70th anniversary celebration. For the last 6 months, we've been sharing stories about our station's history. Stories you may have seen when they aired, but with a little behind-the-scenes twist courtesy of our extensive archive. For the next hour, let's watch a few of those stories together. We start with Wish TV's former political pair, reporter Jim Shella and photographer Jim Hester. Both witnessed history on the local and national levels, including the week in 1988 when Indiana Senator Dan Quayle learned he was to be George H.W. Bush's running mate.
You know, who was this kid? And he would literally, on a Saturday when I was working on the weekends, come knock on the back door. Hey, you guys want to ask me anything? You guys want to ask me anything? And, you know, never in a billion years would have I thought this guy will go on and be a vice president.
Dan Quayle's rise to fame was quite the surprise for Wish TV staff back in the 1980s.
I didn't think he would ever go on to be a congressman.
Our first convention was 1988 Republican convention in New Orleans.
Wish TV's long-running political team reporter Jim Shella and photographer Jim Hester bore witness to Quayle's biggest moment. A moment not everyone saw coming.
Monday morning, the first day of the convention, we did a one-on-one interview with Quayle. Tuesday morning, we did a one-on-one interview with Quayle. Late Tuesday morning, the executive producer at Wish called and said, you guys need to find another story. This one's not going anywhere. And then, of course, Tuesday afternoon.
And I made a choice.
And at that point, things just got crazy.
But when the going gets crazy, the pros come prepared.
Jim had the good sense he said we should have a tape of Dan Quayle. Just Dan Quayle being a U.S. Senator in the state of Indiana, just his face, anything we could get of Dan Quayle.
What we call a pitch reel.
A pitch reel.
Him
right.
at various events.
Yeah. So we probably had about 10, 15 minutes maybe that we put on a videotape. Didn't realize that thing was going to be the most valuable piece of tape in the world.
My choice for the vice presidency is Senator Dan Quayle of Indiana.
We weren't able to get to Dan Quayle's announcement. We missed that. So, but we knew we needed it. But we had Dan Quayle video. So we switched and traded and did all kinds of great things, political things.
Shella and Hester had a front row seat to much of Indiana's political history during their 20-year team-up.
She didn't like the press. Here's the story. Here's the story.
Like this one-on-one interview with then Senator Quayle, his vigilant wife Marilyn nearby, right before President Bush's announcement.
When we finished the interview, I looked at Senator Quayle and said, is there any chance that we could be there when you get the phone call?
Up or down?
Yeah, that we could record you taking the call from President Bush. And Senator Quayle sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and said, I hadn't thought of that. And before he could say anything more, Marilyn looked over and said, absolutely not. And he looked at me and said, well, I guess not.
I just hope when they tell me to be at such and such a phone at such and such a time, that they only want me to wait for about 2 minutes, because I don't think I can wait much longer.
Well, as it turns out, they called his hotel room and he was out taking a walk and they had to call back.
A light-hearted exchange, but the harsh spotlight soon focused in on Dan Quayle.
The Quayle nomination comes at the end of a day filled with controversy over Dan Quayle's background. But for these Indiana delegates, that does nothing to lessen the luster of the moment.
The morning after Quayle got picked,
George Bush led Dan Quayle before reporters, saying his selection as a running mate
was a tough call, but the best choice.
It's the most crowded hotel ballroom I've ever seen. There had to be 200 TV cameras in there.
He acknowledged that at 41, Quayle is young for the position, but said his youth is a tremendous asset.
Senator Quayle is one of the rising stars in the Republican Party.
And he gave some very bad answers to the questions.
Quayle deflected questions about failure to serve in Vietnam, involvement in Contra fundraising, and a 1981 Florida weekend that included other congressmen and former lobbyist and Playboy model Paula Parkinson.
That has been covered, and there's nothing to it.
And all of a sudden, he was a target for the media and the Democrats and for a lot of Republicans. And in some ways, it never got better.
I spent the war in Indiana. Getting shot was not for me.
A lot of people feel that a few years back he took the cowardly way out, because everyone knows that's my age that to get into the National Guard in 1968 was just about impossible.
I did not know in 1969 that I would be in this room today, I'll confess.
Anybody who's in the public eye ought to be ready to take the heat, whether it's serious news questions or a little ribbing.
Nevertheless, a Quayle staffer called the newspaper account a cheap shot.
A long, sleepless week, but this pair continued to work smarter to bring as many facets of the nomination as possible to Wish TV's audience.
On the last day of the convention, Dan Quayle had, I believe, 4 public appearances, and we couldn't get credentials to any of them. But we found somebody from another station in the country in each case who had been there and went and traded pitch reel video for their Today video. And so we had a story on Thursday night that looked like we'd been in Dan Quayle's pocket all day, and we never saw him.
We're going to get as much video. We're going to do the best we can for our viewers. And that's, you know, I know it sounds kind of hokey, but it's the truth.
Dan Quayle served one term as vice president. He and President George H.W. Bush ran for re-election in 1992, losing to Bill Clinton and Al Gore. He declined to run for governor here in Indiana in 1996 due to health reasons and has retired to Arizona. He returned to the national prominence in January 2021, counseling then Vice President Mike Pence on certifying the 2020 election. Quite a historical career path, some 40 years after knocking on Wish TV's back door. Jim Hester retired from Wish TV in 2009 and Jim Shella in 2016, but both remain avid consumers of current events, both locally and nationally. Coming up, a sawed-off shotgun wired to a man's head on live TV, that unforgettable day in our city's history. Up next.
As a news director, I was obviously upset about that, but what I was most upset about, if he got what he wanted, he would not hurt his victim. But on the other hand, I thought accidentally he could pull that trigger.
We head back to 1977. A tense 3 days in February with a man's life at stake and anxious newsrooms fearing the outcome. Tony Karitis had a hostage and demanded one thing in exchange for Richard Hall's freedom: a live press conference. In the days when that was technologically still pretty difficult, Wish TV had to innovate in order to come through.
Is there one story in your whole career that you shot that you can remember? And I said, absolutely. February 8th, 1977. And it came out that a man with a gun, man holding a man with a gun holding a police officer. We thought, what the heck?
A quiet start to a story that became a talker for decades. Reporter Josh Littman raised the alarm here in the 1950 building.
And Josh said, you know, I hear something funny on the radio. I don't know what it is, but I just think there's something going on downtown. And I said, well, get Bill and go.
We set up across the street. There were cops on either side of the door, and all of a sudden this guy comes out of the door with the shotgun strapped to his neck, and Tony's standing behind him. They were both in shirt sleeves at 9 degrees above zero.
They were reporting back to us in a hurry that, hey, there's a guy down here, got a shotgun wired to a guy's head, and he's walking him through downtown Indianapolis.
Dick Hall's the man with the gun around him?
Yes, he's the manager of Colorado.
Josh turned to me and said, where's this guy going? And I said, I don't know, but we're going with him.
And that began the 3-day ordeal.
It was the first time anything like this had ever happened.
That changed television in Indianapolis forever. Tony Kuritis felt he'd gotten the wrong end of a real estate deal. With his hostage, he commandeered a police car for the next phase of his plan.
This has been going on for like 3 or 4 years. It's concerning some property that he owns. He feels like that he's been discriminated against. I think precipitated this hostage and seizure.
Okay, what happened after the other 2 incidents? He one time held a city official 7 or 8 years ago, then he held his sister for some time.
Yes.
What happened after those 2 incidents? Did he just go free?
Well, I arrested him one time for assault and battery with intent to kill, and he was put on probation.
The police and press reconvened at the West Side apartment of Tony Kuritis, who had claimed that he had barrels of gasoline inside to warn off any entry. He held Richard Hall there for 3 days, at times chaining him to a bed. He was eventually negotiated into giving up Hall if he could have a live press conference.
We did not have microwave at that point, so we went out and bought fiber lines from the phone company and spent a small fortune to have this.
We were doing television that had no options to go to different places at the time. You're locked into almost like a telephone with a cord at that point.
Wish TV had taken a studio camera and moved it to the apartment, but it was on the other side of the room, and Tracy Cole picked up the studio camera and carried it across the room and shot the press conference.
Turn the cameras on all 3 you hold it. I want on national television. I've been called a kidnapper, an extortionist, a thug, and everything else. I want it on all 3 national channels. I've got friends all over the country. You read it.
It was late at night, and it was leading into our 11 o'clock news, and all hell's breaking loose, pardon the expression, out there, and you didn't know what was going to happen.
The whole world was sitting there going, are we going to watch this guy get his head blown off on live TV?
One of the biggest events in the history of live television news in Indianapolis that occurred that night.
And so Channel 8 stuck with it.
Hi, baby. You guys be good and quiet. We'll let this gentleman read that. They near made me blow his brains out. Jimmy, I'm the only mean enough to have withstood this without having a stroke or a heart attack.
And Tony's like blankety blank this and blankety blank that.
Hold it. Where's Mr. Gallagher?
Chief Gallagher, he told Josh, when I retire, come talk to me and I'll tell you about the plan to kill Tony.
Photographer Bill Fisher explained that Gallagher had a handkerchief in his pocket to signal to a deputy to try to push the gun off of Hall's neck if Tony started to get out of control.
When he pulled the handkerchief out of his pocket, the deputy would take the shotgun and push it away from Hall's head, and Gallagher would put the gun up to Tony's head and kill him. And they were going to do this live. Gallagher said that there were 3 different times he started to pull the handkerchief out of his pocket, because Tony he'd be talking and he'd just go berserk.
I'm the man that was called a kidnapper. I'm a national hero, and don't you forget it.
These are scenes live from the Crestwood Village apartment complex on the west side of Indianapolis.
I was in touch with Mike Ahern. He was anchoring our coverage from the newsroom. We stayed with it all the way to the end, even to the end of where we heard the gunshot.
Everybody assumed that somebody had died.
Everybody back up.
George, what happened?
Jumped out of the car, ran between the buildings with my camera. As I'm coming around that building,
Tony was allowed to actually fire his shotgun into the air outside.
He was going to show them the gun was really live, and that's as I came around there, and I thought I was being shot.
And so they came back in, they said, it's okay.
The hostage is out, he's okay. Kuritis was found not guilty by reason of insanity and then committed to an institution. He was released in 1988 and died in 2005. Richard Hall died in 2022. Newsrooms, though, had to reflect on the what-ifs and the future.
Nobody at that point anywhere in broadcast television had really had the discussion about when is it appropriate to go live and when is it not.
I think it was a one-off. It was more or less, this happened. We're not going to do this again.
As for Lee Giles and his right-hand man, Mike Ahern, they had that dreaded meeting with the boss.
He said, I should have fired you both. And you know what? It didn't scare me at all because that was a worldwide story and I did what we had to do. My punishment was he got 25 letters from viewers, how dare you? And I had to hand type and send our apologies because he wasn't going to write them. You write them. You caused this, you're writing the letters.
Wish TV reporter Jim Shella told us while he got hired on at the station a few years after the incident, he said Karitzis would call Shella in the newsroom. Shella said every call was about the same. He'd start out being rational, and before very long, he was screaming and swearing. Shella would have to hang up on him. Photographer Jim Hester said watching that live event as a college student spurred him into a career in news. He said to be out there and to be a part of all the action. That wasn't the only event that spurred our staff into careers. Next, Ground Zero and the day the world and our lives changed.
I'll never forget being in the newsroom and looking up and wondering what's happening.
23 years ago, terrorists attacked World Trade Center in New York City. It changed our country and it changed our world. On that day here at WISH, it affected our colleagues as well and spurred 2 future WISH staffers to pursue a career in journalism while hitting extra hard personally for one. We would like to caution, though, that some of the imagery in this story can be upsetting.
Ironically, on the busiest day of the year, it was my off day. I was at home with my young son.
I was on my way to school. I was on my way to class at Adelphi University when I heard the news on the radio.
We had just gotten off the air and we looked up at the monitors in the newsroom.
My TV was sitting on CNN.
I had the morning newscasts on in Chicago, and I didn't have my glasses on, and I'm like, what are these 2 smokestacks?
Turned on the TV and you saw Brian Gumbel talking about a plane into one of the towers.
And I immediately started making my way back to my mom's house in Queens, and traffic was at a standstill.
I called Jim Scott. He said, get in as soon as you can.
Put on the TV, started seeing the coverage.
I saw the second plane hit.
Oh my God!
It was scary. You didn't know what was going on.
When they hit Pentagon, and then another plane went down. I was like, this could be it. I think we're under attack.
Watching the video as it came in off the live feeds was just, what people were watching at home, but, being here in the newsroom, it's like you had one eye on the TV, but then you were on the phone trying to talk to someone else.
There was a shot very specifically of one of the towers coming down, and it looked like the pyroclastic cloud from a volcano just coming down the street.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down.
The light bulbs went off in my head. There was a human being standing there holding this camera and staring down this cloud. And he didn't move and got the shot and recorded that history.
Focus and get the job done.
It was a day that changed my life.
There's nothing you can say. It's just, there's no words to put it in.
A bulk of that communication in one city is on the buildings that came down. There was actually people up there keeping their television stations on the air while this was going on, knowing that they were going to die. I would hope that they were just trying not to think about what was going to happen and thinking about the task at hand when the time came.
We were trying to make sure we got crews everywhere, and the phones in the newsroom were ringing off the hook. And I just remember that people from the sales department, the promotions department, like anyone who didn't work in the newsroom on a daily basis came down to answer the phones.
Another box ready.
You just felt like you had to do something,
Just trying to do whatever I can to help.
You have all these people that just lost family, and you just kind of want to do your part, whatever that might be, whether it's telling somebody's story or,
We all banded together to try to get people where we thought we needed to be.
We caravan in a long convoy of buses, trucks, and equipment. A team effort by police in 5 states to get this rescue crew into New York City.
Got about halfway through Ohio and we slowed down to about 55. They got on the radio and said, why'd you slow down, to the lead officer? And he said, well, the speed limit's 55. His boss said, it's a National emergency. He said, put your foot down. And so we went back up to 80 mile an hour. We're not quite to the tunnels into New York. And Jim Hester, Steve Schweitzer, and Mary McDermott had left about 3 hours after us, and they caught us. I don't know how fast they were doing.
It was just the smoke. It was just a big cloud of smoke.
Before we hit the tunnel, we could see the smoke. We knew it was bad, very bad.
I wasn't in TV, so that was really the first time where I did smell smoke like that. Not knowing at that point that it wouldn't be the last, that was surreal.
That's the rubble pile.
I think at the end of the day, about 15 people were killed from my little pocket of Queens. A lot of firefighters, a lot of cops, people in the financial world.
Turn on Broadway.
It was chaotic. It changed the city forever.
Melissa Ponzi-Reeby grew up in Muncie, graduated from Indiana University, and worked for a while in Indianapolis. She found out yesterday that the worst act of terrorism ever brought out the best qualities possible in many of her fellow New Yorkers.
There's been an immense pouring out of people wanting to donate blood, to volunteer their services. Everyone was very overwhelmed by the generosity.
I remember it was a couple weeks afterwards of watching this every single day, thinking to myself, I think I can do that. I think I can tell stories like that. I wanted to tell stories that resonated with people at home, like their stories were resonating with me as somebody who knew people who lost their lives that day.
We just feel for them. They're working so hard. They're working around the clock, and we want to come out and do our part.
I was sucked into the coverage, obviously, because it was my neighbors going through it. It was people I knew going through it. And that was the way that we all kind of connected, was through, the news.
Minutes that turned into special moments.
It was a piece of history that was from my hometown that made its way out here.
The white sheet on top of one of the beams removed, the statue of an eagle facing east toward New York City revealed.
It was kind of cool to see people from a different area feel the same way we did back in New York.
And there they stood, two steel pillars, rescued from fire and ash, torn, tried, and tested, broken, and battled.
That was Phil Sanchez covering the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 and the dedication of a memorial right here in Indianapolis. Teamed up with photographer Joy Hernandez, who, as you saw, became a photographer because of that historic day back in 2001. Indy's Underground, a surprisingly interesting look at the city's underbelly. When we return.
It was interesting. It was interesting. They're giant. You're not bending over or anything. It's like a river that runs under in downtown Indianapolis.
Now that we have your attention, here's a story we've been following for 41 years. We started off in 2005, 20 years ago, when our city sewer system was the talk of the town. The city-county council passed a measure to raise taxes to correct the issues with the combined sewer overflow. At that time, our political reporter Jim Shella was already very aware of Indy's sewer system dynamics. He got to tour it back in 1983.
Indianapolis has suffered through 100 years of polluted streams and flooded streets. Public Works officials say the cure won't be quick or simple.
The city acknowledges it's going to take years to turn things around, but they say one of the first things that has to happen is to stop raw sewage from flowing into places like Fall Creek.
The long-term plan would require engineers to dig a deep underground tunnel along the creek to capture sewer overflows and send them straight to treatment plants.
And that tunnel's going to take probably 10 to 15 years to be completely online. It's a large project, probably one of the largest projects that we're going to invest in over this 20-year program.
And if you want to know what the big dig is, it's helpful to know what was there before.
One says that when Daniel Ortega lost the election in Nicaragua, he was a better loser. At the State House, Jim Shella, Wish TV, News 8.
Jim, I know you're the State House reporter, but I like to do stories and take people places they have never been and show them things they have never seen.
It's a journey through the sewer system and eventually into the White River.
A series of stories that we called Underground Indianapolis, and we explored what's under the streets of downtown Indianapolis.
This is the Pogues Run sewer, the city's largest. And for these employees of the Department of Public Works, Pogues Run is the office. It's their job to make sure everything flows smoothly through these tunnels.
Normal rain will pretty much come up to about here, just fill the floors. Heavy rainfalls and steady rainfalls, after the various lines catch up with each other, we'll fill the tunnel to about here.
It's this infrastructure that our Our old storm sewers are designed to dump sewage into the regular rainwater system when it overflows.
There are basically two channels. One is sewage, one is runoff, rainwater or whatever. They're big circles in between, and if there's a big runoff, they combine. What's called a combined sewer overflow.
That big tunnel, that big opening on White River that you can literally drive a semi-truck into, you know, it's all part of that and it all relates.
The late Congressman Andy Jacobs explained it best. He said there's a little of all of us in the White River.
There are 2,000 miles of sewers underneath Indianapolis. This one, a storm sewer, winds along a 4.5-mile route. It amounts to little more than an enclosed creek, giving rainwater a path to follow on its way to a larger stream.
Then it all dumps into White River.
Intriguing as they are, sewers and utility tunnels are not exactly unique. You can find them under any big city. But if you look below downtown Indianapolis, you will find some things that are pretty rare. Included is the city's steam system. It's one of the largest in the country.
That was the second part of the series we did on the steam system that's in the Mile Square. Most of the buildings in the Mile Square are heated by steam.
And the old coal-powered company down there, you know, just down by Lucas, the reason they can't get rid of that is it's heating much of downtown Indianapolis, and it still is.
Indianapolis Power and Light has made it into an industry. There are only 3 steam systems in the country larger than this one. It's a system designed primarily to heat buildings, but a number of other uses for the steam have been discovered. Doctors use it to sterilize surgical tools, and computer firms use it to keep humidity at a constant level. At the Hoosier Dome, it will be used to keep snow off the roof. Steam-heated air will be fed between 2 layers of the dome in order to melt snow before it can accumulate. One reason steam is cheap is because the system is so old. Portions date back to the 1800s. And there is another reason IPL holds on to its customers.
If you had to build your own boiler, then you have to meet the current pollution regulations, which are stringent and getting more stringent.
What happens down here is awfully important to anything happening up here. As downtown grows and changes, developers find they need to be as aware of what's under their projects as they are of what's in the neighborhood. Jim Shelley, Channel 8 News on the scene, underground Indianapolis.
The corrective project has been called Dig Indy, or conversationally, Indy's Big Dig. Handed off to Citizens Energy Group in 2011, it has been rumbling under our feet ever since. It's projected to be completed next year, 20 years after the City County Council approved the project. A 100-year flood every 2 decades. We check in on a little Indiana town that had enough.
The threat of this scene repeating itself prompted English residents to sign petitions asking Indiana and the federal government to pay for relocating the town to this nearby area out of the floodplain.
Whatever happened to English, Indiana? For residents, it felt like every 20 years they had a 100-year flood. Fed up, they decided to move to higher ground. In 1994, Wish TV checked in on English, Indiana, population 614 after a flash flood in 1990. Residents petitioned the state and local government for change.
Nestled in a valley where 3 streams merge to form the Little Blue River lies English, Indiana.
It's one of the last old-time towns around.
I remember when it was a little bustling town.
This is small town life. This is what John Mellencamp talks about with the song, I was born in a small town, you know it. This is what he was talking about.
It was all here. We had everything.
2 or 3 restaurants, theater.
This was a soda shop and a drugstore.
Bank on the corner.
You think how much of my past and my memories are located just in this, 1 mile square.
I was used to going downtown about
5 o'clock in the morning and sit and drinking coffee for 2 or 3 hours with the boys and find out all the news and what's going on. But you can't do that anymore, and you miss that.
30 years ago, Wish TV went to English, Indiana for our series Higher Ground. English was a little town on borrowed time.
The beginning of the end for English, Indiana came with the 1979 flood.
We were literally wiped out, but we just swept her away and started over again.
It was termed a 100-year flood, and we didn't think it would happen again. And then, of course, in 1990, when it did happen again, there were those who felt that the only way to save the town was to move it.
So that's when they started talking about moving English up on the hill.
We wanted to know what became of English, how the small town on the move fared, so we went back.
I've lived in English for 97 years.
Lyndon Bob Strawberry Roberts has lived through the highs and the lows of the river levels.
There's no more businesses left downtown, and I still live in the old, what they call the old town of English, because the flood would have got another probably 28, 30 feet that got into my basement.
Strawberry lives up on a hill overlooking the old downtown. And since 1994, while many buildings still remain, most have fallen into extreme disrepair, almost a ghost town.
Ghost towns along the highway. So many people used to call this place home.
Today, English, Indiana brings to mind a different John Mellencamp song, Ghost Towns Along the Highway.
I guess folks, they just down the road.
It's just so hard to believe, right? You're driving through town, like Main Street, right? Where, my dad's business was, where everything happened, right? And it's nothing, it's just grass.
5th Street now splits the Lucas Oil Golf Course.
There were beautiful homes along East 5th Street.
4th Street and Hartford Avenue both dead end into that course. Some driveways remain, memories of old front yards.
People like to hear those stories when they come in and play. You couldn't get two totally opposites. We've got a relatively flat front 9 holes that was in the floodplain, and then you come to the back 9 holes, and we've got our elevation changes up here on the hill and things like that. So it's pretty neat in that regard.
If you come to golf in English, that's all you do, because there's really nothing else, not much else there.
2 years ago, Tammy Redding and her husband reformed the English Civic Club after it had disbanded back in 2008. Without it, the town had lost its sense of togetherness, not even putting up community Christmas lights in the winter.
Just demoralized people so much, and so many people left.
People would call me and say, well, Susan, they're going to move the town. It's never going to be the same. And I was the one saying, yes, we're still going to have each other. It's going to be the same. It's going to be the same. But I wonder, I don't know. Will it? Will we carve memories out up there like we have carved here? I don't know.
It's very heartbreaking to see that once booming little town is just completely almost wiped off the map.
Roberta Toby feels like while people everywhere seem less connected than they were before, English feels that just a bit more.
When I lived down there in the 50s and 60s, you knew everybody in town and you didn't see a stranger. Those times are different now.
They even knew the name of their pets.
Yeah.
The Crawford County Library has been rebuilt. It and the nearby county annex serve as an index to the waterlogged history of this town. At the edge of the golf course stands a statue of town founder William Hayden English. During one flood, they say water was up to his knees. Tammy Redding says that there's a plan to move him to where the businesses used to stand, making the old heart of downtown into a plaza. The Civic Club is also planning on salvaging and renovating the old mill, creating a community gathering spot, hoping to draw a community back together.
The town's never coming back the way it was, right? But we could have some things in the old part of town, in the historic part of town, I like to call it.
Ghost towns along the main highway.
Tammy Redding says the Civic Club has applied for grants to fund their projects, but many of the grants require a monetary match from local organizations. What feels like an impossible feat for less fortunate areas, such as Crawford County. Coming up, Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky himself, John Mellencamp, over the years and over Wish TV's airwaves. Next.
If you really look at the arc of John Mellencamp's life, it's pretty remarkable that he has done what he's done and still stayed true to what he always said that he would be, which is born in a small town, probably die in a small town.
He never wanted to be no pop singer, but while he was rocking in the USA, John Mellencamp made a point to have himself a ball in a small town. At times known as Johnny Cougar or John Cougar Mellencamp, but a sworn Hoosier through and through. He's been representing the Midwest through song for nearly 50 years, and he ain't even done with the night. Check out this little ditty.
Interesting individual.
He's an interesting fellow. I talked to him a couple of times.
Everything's going good. And by the way, I like the facial hair. I like that.
You do?
Yeah.
Well, you know, you gotta. There's not much to entertain me, so I gotta entertain myself with his hair.
It was fascinating interviewing John Mellencamp.
Old songs, familiar faces, and fans in nearly 40 places. That's the tour ahead for John Mellencamp and his band. Before it heads out, the crew heads in to the same tiny garage where it's rehearsed for a generation.
It's basically the recording studio in Brown County is a house. Your typical garage band type rehearsal, you know. It was neat. I grew up listening to all his music, and here I am sitting in his main studio with a baby grand piano, and we're talking to him.
My recollection is he said, "It's time to knock the dust off." He seemed to speak naturally in phrases that would fit perfectly in songs.
And be cooler about it. This time, the Hoosier hero is teaming up with a hero of his own, rock giant John Fogerty, noted for simple, strong songwriting.
I had either made an observation about, or he had started to talk about, Fogerty being able to express complex things with simple lyrics, and he said something along the lines of,
generally, if someone can speak so, you know, plainly, there's a complicated guy at the other end of the pen.
Who speaks like that? He spoke like that.
He said things in other interviews that I can't repeat on TV.
Man, I tell you what, making the record is fun.
I remember asking him about age, because we were both starting to rack up the years, and he, in his sort of world-weary way, says something like,
"Some days I feel like I'm 1,000, but some days I feel all right."
And I'm like, it didn't seem like a put on, it just seemed like that's the way he talked, and still talks.
Talk a little bit about Farm Aid, if you will.
Mellencamp does a lot for the farming community, and rightfully so because of where he comes from.
Got nothing against the big town. Man, I'm still hillbilly enough to say, look who's out there in the big town.
Farm Aid just never was as glamorous as the rest of them, but we are the only one that I think is a real charity organization, because we do it every year.
Small community has bought into.
With much fanfare, John Mellencamp, Neil Young, and Willie Nelson announced Tuesday that a huge concert would be held in the Hoosier Dome to help farmers. To be called Farm Aid 4, it follows in the footsteps of Farm Aid concerts in the past, where proceeds are used to help with support groups for farmers in need.
I remember well going to the Hoosier Dome, watching Farm Aid. The names on that, it was an unbelievably big show. And yeah, I was a kid, I didn't know how big it was. I thought this sort of stuff just happened all the time. But when you look back at that Hoosier Dome Farm Aid, it was Farm Aid 4, is that what it was?
Indiana has some of the richest soils in the world, yet many farmers have found it difficult to make a profit. For years, production costs have outweighed product prices, forcing many off the farm. The Farm Aid concerts have focused on this problem, and farmers say this has helped educate the American public.
Farmers generally agree that the concert was effective, but they are concerned about the environmental issues raised.
I think about my grandpa, my neighbors and my name. It's nice to feel like dying, like I skipped in the rain on the state road.
And Hoosier Rocker, where John Mellencamp will be performing in Indy for free.
24-hour News 8 continues now.
Notre Dame, Purdue, but I particularly like it when Indiana wins. That's my favorite basketball moment.
Mellencamp on stage in the center of the city in the middle of Final Four weekend. No charge, everyone welcome.
The
The sound of tornado sirens filled the air within minutes of Hoosier rocker John Mellencamp wrapping up a concert on Monument Circle.
I've never been in a rainstorm ever in my life that's been like that. That's incredible.
The storm came from the southwest, and the Chase building is directly in the path of the Regions. An additional load may have come from wind tumbling over the top of the first Indiana building. Notice the height, just about equal to where the Regions floors were damaged.
You can tell right away when you meet John Mellencamp that he's going to do it his way. And if you don't follow those rules, I saw him one time walk off a talk show. He's his own star. He doesn't like to be put in any category.
And I just try to write songs that hopefully will make the listener think about himself and emotionally somehow connect with the listener. And if you can do that, then I think you've made a friend for life. It just takes one song.
He is very much his own person. When you first sit down with him, he makes that pretty clear. And I know that really frustrates some people. It didn't bother me in the slightest. I think very much if someone wants to talk with us, that's terrific. And if they don't want to talk with us, I respect that as well. He's nice enough that he talked to me.
Thank you very much. Good luck, you guys.
And the little pink house in his hit song, Mellencamp has said over the years that it was located right here in Indianapolis, keeping it local. He could see it while driving on I-65. That song was released on October 23rd, 1983. And that makes that song now 41 years old. You could almost say that trivia hurts so good. We'll be right back.
Well, we are only halfway through our year celebrating our Wishtory. Until the end of June, we will bring you more of these treasures from our archives. And there's so much more available online right now. Just grab your phone, scan the QR code on your screen. We will leave you with a little bit of Wish TV special, Our Fair Beatles, a 1964 Wish TV exclusive.